At 0600 on June 4, 1942, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stood on the bridge of the carrier Akagi and looked at a tactical situation that, on paper, was completely in his favor. He had 4 fleet carriers. The Americans, according to every intelligence report his staff had given him, had 2. His aircraft were superior. His pilots were the most experienced naval aviators in the world. His carriers had not lost a single ship in 6 months of continuous combat operations across half the Pacific Ocean. The plan was straightforward in its strategic logic. Destroy the American carriers, take Midway Island, force the United States Pacific Fleet into a decisive engagement on Japanese terms, and end the carrier war in the Pacific before America's industrial capacity could make the outcome inevitable. What happened in the next 24 hours destroyed 4 of Japan's 6 fleet carriers, killed the core of their most experienced naval aviator corps, and changed the direction of the entire Pacific War in a single afternoon over a stretch of ocean north of a coral atoll most Americans had never heard of. But the part of the story that gets lost in the drama of the battle itself is what Japanese admirals actually said, wrote, and believed when they looked at the American carrier numbers before the shooting started. The gap between what they thought they knew and what was actually waiting for them in the waters north of Midway Island is the story of how the most powerful naval force Japan had ever assembled sailed into a trap it had built for itself out of its own confidence. This is no man's land. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. New documentaries drop every single week. The Japanese Naval Command that planned the Midway operation in the spring of 1942 was operating from a position of genuine confidence that was not entirely without foundation in the record of the preceding 6 months. In the time since Pearl Harbor, the Imperial Japanese Navy had compiled a combat record without precedent in modern naval history. They had sunk or damaged 18 American warships at Pearl Harbor in a single morning. They had sunk the British battleships Prince of Wales and Repulse off the coast of Malaya. They had swept the combined American, British, Dutch, and Australian naval forces from the waters of the Dutch East Indies in a campaign so rapid and so complete that Allied commanders struggled to explain what had happened. They had raided into the Indian Ocean and struck Ceylon with a carrier force that the Royal Navy could not effectively contest, sinking 2 British cruisers and a carrier in the process. And they had fought the Battle of the Coral Sea in May of 1942, an engagement that Japanese planners assessed as a Japanese strategic victory, despite the loss of the light carrier Shoho, because American forces had been prevented from interfering with the Port Moresby invasion operation, and because the American carrier Lexington had been sunk. Japanese intelligence estimated incorrectly that the carrier Yorktown had been so severely damaged at the Coral Sea that she was out of the war for months, possibly permanently. This assessment was based on genuine combat damage reports combined with a fundamental underestimation of American industrial and repair capacity that would prove to be one of the most consequential intelligence failures of the entire war. The admirals who planned Midway believed they were going to face a maximum of 2 American fleet carriers. The Yorktown, in their assessment, was not a factor. Rear Admiral Matomi Ugaki, Yamamoto's chief of staff, recorded in his diary in late May that the American carrier force had been significantly weakened by the Coral Sea engagement, and that Midway represented an opportunity to destroy what remained before it could be reinforced or rebuilt. That diary entry captures exactly the mental model the entire Japanese command structure was working from. The number that Japanese admirals did not have and could not have anticipated was 3. The United States Pacific Fleet was going to meet them at Midway with 3 fleet carriers, not 2. The USS Enterprise and the USS Hornet were expected and accounted for in Japanese planning. The USS Yorktown was the variable that the entire Japanese operational plan failed to account for, and that no one in the Japanese intelligence system had provided adequate warning about. The Yorktown had taken a direct bomb hit at the Coral Sea that penetrated her flight deck and detonated inside the ship, killing 66 men and causing damage that American repair crews initially estimated would take 90 days to fix. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commanding the Pacific Fleet from his headquarters in Pearl Harbor, did not have 90 days. He had 72 hours. He walked through the Yorktown's damaged spaces personally on May 27th, assessed what he saw with the eye of a man who understood both naval engineering and strategic urgency, and told his repair crews that the ship needed to be combat-ready in 3 days. What followed was one of the most extraordinary repair operations in the history of naval warfare. 1,400 workers from the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard worked around the clock in overlapping shifts, cutting away damaged structure, welding new plating into place, bypassing destroyed electrical systems with jury-rigged alternatives, patching the flight deck, and restoring the ship's ability to operate aircraft at the pace of men who understood what the ship was needed for and when. They did not restore her to full combat capability. The repairs were partial, improvised in places, held together by welds that the workers knew would not pass peacetime inspection standards and were not asked to. But when the Yorktown sailed out of Pearl Harbor on May 30th, 1942, she could launch and recover aircraft. She could steam at flank speed, and she was heading for a position north of Midway Island that Japanese intelligence had told Admiral Nagumo was empty ocean occupied by no American forces worth accounting for. The operational plan that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had designed for the Midway operation was a masterpiece of complexity that contained within it the seeds of its own destruction, though no one in the Japanese command structure was positioned to see it at the time. Yamamoto's fundamental strategic objective was to force the American Pacific Fleet into a decisive surface engagement at a time and place of Japanese choosing, destroy it comprehensively, and establish a defensive perimeter in the Central Pacific that the United States could not break through before domestic political pressure forced a negotiated peace. Midway was the bait. Japanese forces would seize the island. The Americans would be forced to respond to protect a position so close to Hawaii that its loss would be militarily and politically unacceptable. And when they responded, Yamamoto's overwhelming surface force would destroy them. The plan required two things to be true simultaneously. It required the Americans to respond with their carriers, and it required those carriers to be the two weakened carriers that Japanese intelligence had identified, rather than a full three-carrier task force that Japanese planners had not anticipated. Yamamoto's plan also assumed that surprise was on the Japanese side. It was not. American codebreakers at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor, working under Commander Joseph Rochefort, had broken enough of the Japanese naval code to determine the operational target, the approximate date of the attack, and the broad composition of the attacking forces. Nimitz knew Yamamoto was coming. He knew approximately when. He knew where to position his carriers to deny Nagumo the element of surprise that the entire Japanese operational plan depended on for its success. The first indication Nagumo received that the morning of June 4th was not going according to plan came at 0728, when one of his search aircraft reported a sighting of American surface ships northeast of Midway. The report was fragmentary and initially unconcerning, but then the report was updated, American warships, and then at 0820, the single word in the updated transmission that Nagumo had not planned for, what appeared to be a carrier. Nagumo's reaction to that report, documented in the Japanese after-action records and in the accounts of officers who were present on the Akagi's bridge during those critical minutes, has been studied by military historians for more than 80 years. His immediate tactical problem was specific and geometrically brutal. He had launched his first strike wave against Midway Island in the early morning, and those aircraft were now returning and needed to land. His second wave aircraft were in the process of being rearmed with land attack bombs for a second strike on Midway's ground installations rather than anti-ship torpedoes, because the original intelligence had concluded no American carriers were present in the operational area. The order to change that armament now had to be reversed at the worst possible moment. Torpedoes had to be brought back up from the magazines and reinstalled. Bombs had to be moved below and stowed. His flight decks were crowded with returning aircraft, active fuel lines, ordnance being moved, and maintenance crews doing three things at once. The American carrier that one of his search planes had found was already closing the distance, and every minute Nagumo spent reorganizing his decks was a minute the geometry of the battle was moving against him. The Japanese after-action records from Midway are among the most candid military documents produced by any nation during the Second World War, and what they contain about the shock of the American carrier numbers is worth examining closely. Rear Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi, commanding the 2nd Carrier Division from the carrier Hiryu, sent a message to Nagumo during the critical decision period of the morning of June 4th that has become one of the most analyzed signals in naval history. Yamaguchi recommended an immediate strike against the American carriers using whatever aircraft were available on deck, regardless of their state of readiness. He understood, with a clarity that Nagumo did not demonstrate in those same minutes, that the window for offensive action was closing rapidly, and that the worst outcome was to be caught with aircraft and fuel and ordnance on deck during an American attack. Nagumo chose to wait for a properly organized, maximum-strength strike. Yamaguchi's recommendation was overruled, and within the hour, the American dive bombers arrived from altitude. In the official Japanese inquiry conducted after the battle, surviving flag officers, including Nagumo himself, described a consistent experience of professional disbelief at the American carrier numbers. The presence of the Yorktown specifically, a ship their intelligence system had assessed as damaged to the point of incapacitation, appeared in multiple independent accounts as the specific detail that most fundamentally violated their professional expectations of what they should have been facing that morning north of Midway. The Yorktown's presence at Midway did more than add a 3rd flight deck to the American order of battle. It fundamentally changed the geometry of the air battle in a way that Japanese defensive doctrine had not been designed to handle. American carrier doctrine at Midway organized the 3 carriers into 2 task forces operating in mutual support, but with enough geographic separation to complicate Japanese targeting. Task Force 17, built around the Yorktown under Rear Admiral Frank Fletcher, and Task Force 16, built around the Enterprise and Hornet under Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance, were positioned to attack the Japanese carriers while presenting the Japanese with a targeting problem their combat air patrol could not fully solve. Japanese defensive systems were designed to protect a carrier group against attacks from a limited number of directions. 3 American carriers attacking from coordinated but geometrically distinct vectors overwhelmed the defensive system in ways that 2 carriers could not have. The Yorktown's air group contributed 35 aircraft to the strikes that hit the Japanese carriers on the morning of June 4th. Her torpedo bombers flew in at low altitude and were destroyed almost entirely by Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire without scoring a single hit. But they pulled the Japanese combat air patrol down from altitude at exactly the moment that American dive bombers from the Enterprise and Yorktown arrived overhead at high altitude and found the sky above the Japanese carriers largely undefended. The Japanese fighters that could have intercepted the dive bombers were committed against the torpedo bombers below them. The dive bombers came in almost completely unopposed, and in approximately 5 minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 fleet carriers were fatally and irreversibly damaged. The decision that Chuichi Nagumo made in the 40 minutes between receiving the first report of an American carrier and the arrival of American dive bombers has been debated by naval historians for more than 80 years without a definitive consensus verdict. He chose to wait. He chose to bring his returning first strike aircraft aboard, complete the rearming cycle, and launch a properly organized maximum strength strike rather than immediately launching whatever was available in a disorganized partial attack. The argument for his decision is genuine. A partial strike launched immediately with aircraft in the wrong configuration might have been intercepted and defeated without causing decisive damage, while a properly organized full strike would have had a substantially higher probability of sinking the American carriers outright. The argument against his decision is the one history made for him, which is that while he was waiting to organize the perfect strike, American dive bombers arrived and made the question permanently irrelevant. What the debate tends to obscure is that the decision was downstream of a more fundamental failure. The reason Nagumo was in this position at all was that his intelligence had told him definitively There were no American carriers in the area when he launched his morning strike against Midway. If that intelligence had been accurate, the tactical problem that produced the decision that lost the battle would not have arisen. The decision and the defeat were both consequences of the intelligence failure, not its cause. The American dive bomber attack on the Japanese carriers on the morning of June 4, 1942, lasted approximately 5 minutes from the first bomb hit to the last. And in those 5 minutes, the strategic balance of the Pacific War was permanently and irreversibly altered. Lieutenant Commander Clarence Wade McCluskey, leading the Enterprise dive bomber group, had searched for the Japanese carriers after losing contact with them during the long outbound flight, and found them by following the wake of a Japanese destroyer hurrying to rejoin the fleet at high speed. He brought his aircraft in from the southwest at high altitude. At almost exactly the same moment, Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie arrived with the Yorktown's dive bomber group from a slightly different bearing. The Japanese carriers below them had their flight decks crowded with aircraft being armed and refueled, with ordnance being moved and fuel lines being run in the exact configuration that maximized secondary damage from any single bomb hit. The combat air patrol that should have been at altitude was down low dealing with the torpedo bombers that had attacked and been destroyed in the preceding minutes. The dive bombers came in almost unopposed. The Akagi was hit by 2 bombs that detonated among the armed and fueled aircraft on her flight deck, triggering secondary explosions that destroyed the ship. The Kaga was hit by 4 bombs in rapid succession and burned with a ferocity her crew could not control. The Soryu was hit by 3 bombs and was abandoned within 20 minutes. 3 fleet carriers, representing the offensive core of the most powerful carrier force Japan had ever assembled, were removed permanently from the war in 5 minutes. The American dive bomber attack on the Japanese carriers on the morning of June 4, 1942, lasted approximately 5 minutes from the first bomb hit to the last, and in those 5 minutes the strategic balance of the Pacific War was permanently and irreversibly altered. Lieutenant Commander Clarence Wade McCluskey, leading the Enterprise dive bomber group, had searched for the Japanese carriers after losing contact with them during the long outbound flight and found them by following the wake of a Japanese destroyer hurrying to rejoin the fleet at high speed. He brought his aircraft in from the southwest at high altitude. At almost exactly the same moment, Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie arrived with the Yorktown's dive bomber group from a slightly different bearing. The Japanese carriers below them had their flight decks crowded with aircraft being armed and refueled, with ordnance being moved and fuel lines being run in the exact configuration that maximized secondary damage from any single bomb hit. The combat air patrol that should have been at altitude was down low dealing with the torpedo bombers that had attacked and been destroyed in the preceding minutes. The dive bombers came in almost unopposed. The Akagi was hit by 2 bombs that detonated among the armed and fueled aircraft on her flight deck, triggering secondary explosions that destroyed the ship. The Kaga was hit by 4 bombs in rapid succession and burned with a ferocity her crew could not control. The Soryu was hit by 3 bombs and was abandoned within 20 minutes. 3 fleet carriers, representing the offensive core of the most powerful carrier force Japan had ever assembled, were removed permanently from the war in 5 minutes. The accounts that Japanese admirals and senior staff officers left about the Battle of Midway form a body of documentation remarkable for its candor about the intelligence failure that made the defeat possible and the psychological impact of the American carrier numbers on officers who had planned against a completely different tactical reality. Admiral Yamamoto, who had remained with the main surface force far to the west and received the news of the successive loss of 4 carriers by radio over the course of the day, is reported by multiple independent sources to have sat in extended silence before issuing any orders. His reaction when he finally spoke returned specifically and repeatedly to the Yorktown, the carrier his intelligence had told him was out of the war. Several accounts describe him expressing specific disbelief that a ship assessed as incapacitated had been present and fully operational at the battle. Nagumo's own after-action report contains a passage that has been translated and analyzed repeatedly because of what it reveals about how the Japanese command understood their defeat. He wrote that the presence of a third American carrier in the operational area constituted intelligence that his system had failed to provide, and that the absence of that information had directly shaped every decision he made during the critical morning hours of June 4th. He was not wrong. The intelligence failure was real, complete, and decisive. What the after-action records cannot fully contain is an acknowledgement of the deeper structural problem the failure revealed. The confidence with which Japanese admirals assessed American carrier strength before Midway was the same confidence that had been validated by 6 months of unbroken success across the Pacific. That validation made it more dangerous rather than less, because it meant that when the assessment was wrong, no one in the Japanese command structure had the professional standing or the institutional incentive to question it carefully enough before the ships sailed and the aircraft launched and the battle began, and the Yorktown appeared on the horizon exactly where Japanese intelligence had said there was nothing. 4 Japanese fleet carriers, lost in a single day, to a force that Japanese intelligence had told their admirals was 2 weakened carriers, not 3 fully operational ones. The Yorktown, the ship they had written off in their planning documents and their diary entries and their confident pre-battle assessments, was the carrier that changed the geometry of the attack that ended Japanese naval dominance in the Pacific. The admirals who survived Midway spent the rest of the war trying to explain what had happened, and the answer was the same every time they came back to it. They had not known about the third carrier. And they had not known because they had been too confident in what they believed they already knew to look carefully enough at what they did not. If this video meant something to you, hit the like button right now. It is the single best way to push this story to someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you are not already here. Drop a comment telling us where you are watching from and whether anyone in your family served in the Pacific. We will see you in the next one.